Welcome to Tales from SYL Ranch Live, the vlogcast that reminds you that everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone. And tonight we've got a live stream where we're going to talk about the zero aggression principle, or frankly anything else that happens to come to mind. Let me pop out my chat really quick so I can actually see it and place it in a spot where it looks like I'm supposed to be looking at it. Hey Marshall, how's life going? And TikTok goes the clock. Yep. Stream is hot at the edge. Good AV sync, a good thing to know. Always like to know that I'm doing things. And hi Larry. Now, I'll have you know that various reasons I'm going to be essentially repeating questions that people may ask me because I'm doing this where it goes out because I'll become a parent in a moment to BitChute. And that is because, and I'll start off just talking about, excuse me, my damn chair went and slid down on me. I got to do something about this chair. Anyhow, I want to talk about the Vox adpocalypse that has just hit YouTube. Now, I have to tell you that this doesn't directly affect me because I am not eligible for monetization on YouTube. I don't have enough viewers or sub counts. However, it is very much hitting a lot of other users. So, let me stick on my glasses so I can read this a little better. This is what the new hate speech policy of YouTube says. We've always had policies that prohibited hate speech on YouTube. And on June 5th, we announced some changes to our hate speech policies. And you can learn more about those changes here. The below policy has been updated with those changes. Hate speech is not allowed on YouTube. We remove content promoting violence or hatred against individuals or groups based on any of the following attributes: age, caste, disability, ethnicity, gender identity, nationality, race, immigration status, religion, sex or gender, sexual orientation, victims of major or violent event and their kin. And if you see that any content that violates this policy, please report it. Instructions for reporting our community guidelines are available here, and there's a link to that. Yes, Larry, be careful not to hurt somebody's feelings. That's what started all of this nonsense. And Marshall says, yes, but who defines hate speech? If I defined it as socialist propaganda, will YouTube ban people based on that? No, they won't ban it based on socialist propaganda. They'll ban it based on conservative propaganda, potentially libertarian propaganda, but they won't base it on socialist propaganda. What this means for you: if you're posting content, don't post content on YouTube if the purpose of that content is to do one or more of the following. The first, encourage violence against individuals or groups based on any of the attributes noted above. We don't allow threats on YouTube, and we treat implied calls for violence as real threats. You can learn more about our policies on threats and harassment, linked to another thing. And the second is inciting hatred against individuals or groups based on any of the attributes noted above. And other types of content that violates this policy: dehumanizing individuals or groups by calling them subhuman, comparing them to animals, insects, pests, disease, or any other non-human entity. Praise or glorify violence against individuals or groups based on the attributes noted above. Use racial, ethnic, religious, or other slurs where the primary purpose is to promote hatred. Use stereotypes that incite or promote hatred based on any of the attributes noted above. This can take the form of speech, text, or imagery promoting these stereotypes or treating them as factual. Yes, Marshall says, ooh, other types, the classic "we don't like" clause. Yeah, exactly. You cannot claim that individuals or groups are physically or mentally inferior, deficient, or diseased based on any of the attributes noted for the purpose of inciting hatred. This includes statements that one group is less than another, calling them less intelligent, less capable, or damaged, which means all of those wonderful things that I have said about AOC probably fall into that category. allege the superiority of a group over those with any of the attributes noted above to justify violence, discrimination, segregation, or exclusion. Conspiracy theories ascribing evil, corrupt, or malicious intent to individuals or groups based on any of the attributes noted above. Call for the subjugation or domination over individuals or groups based on any of the attributes noted above. And deny that a well-documented violent event ever took place. In terms of educational content, we may allow content that includes hate speech if the primary purpose is educational, documentary, scientific, or artistic in nature. This is not a free pass to promote hate speech. Examples include a documentary about a hate group. Educational content that isn't supporting that group or promoting ideas would be allowed. A documentary promoting violence or hatred wouldn't be allowed. Or a documentary about the scientific study of humans. A documentary about how theories have changed over time, even if it includes theories about the inferiority or superiority of a specific group, would be allowed because it's educational content. We won't allow a documentary claiming there is scientific evidence today that an individual or group is inferior or subhuman. This policy applies to videos, video descriptions, comments, live streams, and any other YouTube product or feature. For educational content that includes hate speech, this content must appear in the images or audio of the video itself, providing it in the title or description is insufficient. Larry says censorship is a good thing for YouTube. I'm going to talk about that. I think it's a bad thing all the way around, but here are some examples of hate speech not allowed on YouTube. I'm glad this violent event happened. They got what they deserved, referring to persons with the attributes noted above. Persons with the attributes noted above are dogs, or persons with the attribute noted above are like animals. So I guess this would prevent someone from, say, calling MS-13 animals or something like that. More examples. Get out there and punch a person with the attributes noted above. Notice that this does not include this thing going around calling punch a Nazi, which I hate, by the way, because the left has been calling anyone who is left of Che Guevara a Nazi. All Trump supporters are Nazis, they say. Other examples. Everyone in groups with attributes noted above are criminals and thugs, like MS-13, I guess. Persons with the attributes noted above is scum of the earth, are a disease, are less intelligent than us because their brains are smaller. Our existence is threatened by group of any of the subjects noted above, so we should drive them out at every chance we get. A group of the individuals noted above has an agenda that to run the world and get rid of us, which again probably runs afoul of virtually everything I have ever had to say about people who are extremely far left and are communists and socialists. Attribute noted above is just a form of mental illness that needs to be cured, which is something that people say about liberals now, that they have a mental illness. A person with any of the attributes noted above shouldn't be educated in schools because they shouldn't be educated at all. Or all of the so-called victims of this violent event are actors. No one was hurt, and this is just a false flag. Please remember that these policies are examples, and don't post content if you think it might violate this policy. Now, what happens when content violates this policy? If your content violates this policy, we'll remove the content and send you an email to let you know. If this is the first time you've posted violent content that violates our community standards guidelines, you will get a warning with no penalty to your channel. If it's not, we'll issue a strike against your channel. Your channel will be terminated if you receive 3 strikes. You can learn more about our strike system here. They've got a link to it. If you think your content comes close to hate speech, we may limit YouTube features available for that content. You can learn more about the features here, and there's a link to that. And then they have some other links: importance of context, recent transparency report, and linked features for certain videos. So let me go back and take a look at my comments here. Marshall says, YouTube, the moral and ethical arbiter of accepted speech. All hail YouTube. And throwing milkshakes is fine. Yes, you're absolutely right, Larry. That's just speech. Yeah. Indoctrination in school prisons is fine, not education. Yeah, which runs afoul of virtually everything I've said about modern education. Oh, man. These guys. You know, the real answer to speech that you find offensive is more speech. It's so that you can call out people that you don't like and tell them what scum they are. Restricting speech only causes the public discourse to be restricted to only one point of view, and one, in this case, that is clearly liberal, and not a single liberal nor Antifa, which are a violent terrorist organization, have had their channels removed. Only conservatives have had them removed or demonetized or completely removed. Probably say, in my opinion, is that my channel is probably days are numbered. Should I get enough subs or like or become successful enough to qualify for monetization, because perhaps even if I'm not eligible, because some of my content no doubt runs afoul of some of the broad definition of these terms and will continue to do so because I refuse to toe the fantastically leftist technocratic view of things. Interesting thing about this. Yesterday, I was going to post on Facebook, because I market this thing everywhere. I was going to post on Facebook that I was going to be doing this live stream tonight, and part of what I was going to be talking about is this Vox apocalypse. And Facebook intercepted that. Now, all I had said was I was going to talk about it, but Facebook intercepted it and said that it was some kind of violation of their guidelines. I put it under review, but God knows how long that's going to take. But I was really very surprised about that. What that really means is there is collusion going on between YouTube and Facebook. They apparently do not want you advertising that you're going to talk about this. Marshall says, apparently YouTube hasn't looked at the very public political debates, which should be called almost violent arguments, which took place in the mid to late 1800s and early 1900s. Yeah, I mean, what we've got now, let me tell you something, right? And Marshall knows whom I'm talking about. I have been involved in online Star Trek fandom since before there was an internet. And there was a guy who was not really a troll, but he thought he knew everything. And if you ever got into a conversation with him about anything related to Star Trek and disagreed with him, he was just vociferous, and he was an attack dog. He would never let it go. He would consistently go on and on about it. The words "we have to agree to disagree" were not in his freaking vocabulary. And ultimately, he was banned from these online forums. We'd let him back. He would be banned again. And I tried to get along with him. Everybody tried to get along with him, but you couldn't. You know, the guy was just too nutty. And, you know, I look at what's going on now in social media, which is, you know, very uncivil. And I see it and I look, oh, okay, it's just this guy again. Who cares? You know, ultimately, these are just words on a screen to me. I am never going to meet most of these people. And if they're going to be a jerk to me, who cares? You know, and the same thing applies to videos, right? If you don't like the content of the video, you know, swiping away or clicking away is real easy. You know, these are people you're never going to meet, and who cares what they have to say beyond a certain point? And if you really dislike it, well, get a channel. The barrier to entry is not large. If you look at the videos that I was doing when I first started this that looked like hell in terms of production values, it's not like it's hard to do. You can get on there and make videos with your freaking phone if you want to, you know. So the answer to speech that you don't like is more speech, so that you can tell it you don't like it, and here's why. Marshall says he did everything. He just didn't show that some of the things he knew weren't exactly accurate. The guy thought he knew everything. To me, this was really a precursor to modern, social media, where everybody is screaming about something, and the relative anonymity of social media means that there's no civility left. You're not nice. Now, there's ways you can deal with this. I had somebody become uncivil in the comments on one of my videos, and I just said, hey, there's no reason to be, hostile about this. I have an opinion. You can have an opinion that's totally different. We don't have to agree. Why don't you tell me what you disagree about, and we can talk about it. And after that, it became a perfectly, sane, normal conversation. You can defuse the situation just by saying, hey, hold on a minute, man. Dude, there's no reason to get hostile about this. We can talk about this like normal people. You can also just ignore them. That's another thing you can do when somebody's being real bad, nasty. When you pay attention to them, it just gives them power. And sometimes, Marshall said in other places too, and I agree, you can make fun of them. If you're clever enough, if you have the brains enough, you can just go and say to these people, when they get jerks on you, just make fun of them. And they'll, usually shut up. Now, I do want to mention that I had my entire channel deleted. I had a channel before this, and it was deleted for totally unspecified community guideline reasons. There was about 300 videos, most of which were me live streaming reviews of television and film, as a science fiction one. Fortunately, I backed them all up, but that whole channel was deleted, and I have not the slightest clue why. I mean, did I say something in a review that somebody didn't like and reported? I have no idea. They were pretty damned innocuous from my perspective. And the Vox adpocalypse, they call it the Vox adpocalypse, adpocalypse rather, because the guy who got it started was apparently some idiot that worked for Vox, who disliked the fact that Steven Crowder was making fun of him by using the exact same language that he uses to describe himself. So Crowder was demonetized, and you have to understand that a lot of these big YouTubers, this is their money. This is how they make their money, is by receiving ad revenue off of YouTube. So when they get demonetized, they may have staffs behind them. When you get to be big, I'm a one-man operation, but when you get to be big, you got staffs working for you, people who do your editing and all that, and the sound people, and, things get much more complicated. So when you demonetize them, you essentially have killed their business. So the Vox adpocalypse does not really affect me because my subs and view counts are too low for me to be eligible for monetization. My near-term goal, frankly, is to get 100 subs, because this will mean I will qualify for a personalized YouTube URL, which is important for marketing. I've got a whole line of merch and stuff that I would like to sell, but I can't really do it without an actual URL that makes sense. Right now, if you look at my URL, it's just a whole string of hexadecimal essentially behind it. So, if you want me to get to that point, please, as I always say, tell your family, neighbors, friends, pets, and livestock to please subscribe to my channel. Now, I'm also, because I think that probably my days are numbered on this, I am diversifying out to a BitChute. You can find me at bitchute.com/SYL Ranch. They don't have the same problems with giving somebody a URL. I signed up as the SYL Ranch is my username. Bingo, I had this URL. So it's bitchute.com/SYL Ranch. I like that simply because everything that I post is automatically mirrored over there. And if I need to start posting there, like, for example, this live stream, that won't be automatically posted over there. So I'll pull down a copy when this is over, and I'll post it up there manually. But otherwise, it's otherwise up there. BitChute, I certainly recommend that. Go get yourself an account on there. Certainly subscribe to me. But there are lots and lots of different channels that are now diversifying out to BitChute because they figure their days here are numbered. Marshall says, 28 more subs to go. Yes, I have about 28 more subs to go. Again, tell all of your friends, family, neighbors, pets, and livestock to subscribe to my channel. I'm also looking at other places to diversify. There are a number of other ones. They don't quite do what YouTube does. Nobody seems to do these live streams. There's other things associated with this channel that I need to have done. I need to get my IMDb and Internet Archive presence updated. This includes all these 300 videos, which fortunately I had pulled down before they killed me. And they need to be uploaded to our Internet Archive and correctly cataloged, which is more complex than it sounds. I do need to have all of the dates and credits for all of these videos added to IMDb. And frankly, I need a professional headshot for IMDb. If anybody out there wants to volunteer for any of these jobs, that would certainly be deeply appreciated. It's going to take me forever. And frankly, if you know someone who does free headshots, feel free to tell me, because I can't afford a photographer. So, to be clear, also, I believe that any business has the right to refuse service to anyone for any reason, even if it's because you dislike their politics, because to do otherwise allows the government's camel's nose into that tent, and it will not stop until government controls who you can do business with, and that would be a very bad thing. And you just see the bakery being forced to bake a cake for a gay couple's wedding against the bakery's wishes. You do not want government telling people who they can do business with. So YouTube being a private company, I say, okay, well, if you want to kick me off because of my political views, okay, I'm just going to go look for alternatives such as BitChute. And, believe me, when there are enough eyes on other platforms, the reason I'm here is because of the eyes, because of the number of people. But when there are enough eyes on another platform, I am gone from here. Let this place become a haven for socialists and communists, and I will put my videos up on services that simply allow me to speak my mind. And that's my take on the Vox adpocalypse. It's bad. YouTubers who are actually making money off of this are going to see their incomes cut to zero, and that's going to be bad. And it certainly means, potentially for me, if I suddenly had an enormous number of viewers that popped in and started watching all my videos and liking and subbing, got to the point where I was actually eligible for monetization, I suspect they'd look back at my content and decide certain things, like when I call AOC an idiot because she doesn't know what a garbage disposal is. Things like that. And by the way, I am trying to be more respectful to AOC. And that is solely because, if you look at my videos, I have a video out there that is an invitation for her to visit South Dakota and have me as a guide, because she is so provincial and so ignorant of things about agriculture that I think taking her out there for a few days would probably educate her in a big way. So I'm trying to be nice about her, but she's the gift that keeps on giving. Every time she opens her mouth, something weird and sometimes stupid comes out of it. Like her backtracking on the 12 years thing. I'm sorry, I saw the video. She was clear. She said we had 12 years until the world ends, and it's like her generation's World War II and should be treated as such. So when she comes back and says, no, I didn't, it was just, didn't really mean 12 years, I meant something else, no, I'm sorry, I heard you. I understand now probably what's happened is you've talked to actual scientists and they said, Alexandria? No. So... Anyway, aside from that, I am totally open for questions at this point. Anybody wants to throw anything at me about the zero aggression principle, happy to answer it. I do have some other things I can talk about that get into much thornier problems with the zero aggression principle that I've got prepared, but you can certainly feel free to throw anything that you want at me. I am prepared to answer any questions on that. I have been what I like to call sort of a zero aggression principle philosopher for some time, probably a good 20 years. And I have to blame this on libertarian science fiction author L. Neil Smith. Go read his stuff. If you like graphic novels, his seminal novel on this is the probability broach. It's a novel about alternate universes, one of which is essentially the Libertopia that I described in my Zero Aggression Principle prepared piece. It's all Neil's fault. It's all Neil's fault. And we used to be decent enough friends. But then he did a hit piece on me. I mean, an outright hit piece on me. I disagree with the notion of putting a wall along the southern border. I know lots of people who think that's a good idea. I don't, because it has unintended consequences that people don't understand. Sure, it may keep out the huge number of people that are headed this direction, but by the same token, it keeps us in. What happens if something happens? And it could, where we would want to flee south. Well, we ain't going to flee south. We'll only flee north. So I think that's an unintended consequence. I think putting something like that, it's akin to the Great Wall of China, which of course did work in terms of what it was supposed to do, and this probably would work in terms of what it's supposed to do. But the notion of having it in North America just kind of bothers me. I think there's other things we can do, and I think, give credit where credit is due. I'm not a big fan of anything like, taxation or tariffs or anything, but Trump's threat to put a gigantic tariff on Mexican goods has now led them to start thinking about coming to the table where they will say, okay, we're going to stop these people from coming north. So, because right now what they're doing is basically helping them. So if that happens, that's probably a good thing in terms of that. Larry says, population explosion in the 1970s was supposed to be the end of the world. Oh, the number of times that I have heard about the end of the world. Yeah, if you go back in science fiction, you see it. You see it all the way back to 100 years ago. The science fiction had been predicting, global warming, global cooling, death by overpopulation, death by energy use, death by pollution. The entire concept of the modern environmentalist started out as a much smaller movement in the 1970s. The deal was really that for most of, up until the 1990s, a good chunk of half of my life or so, more, a little less, we had the Soviet Union to fight. We were competing with them about which countries we can grab and make into our client states. And so all of our efforts were pushed outward, not inward. And when we lost that, everything went inward. And so now you don't have this big threat to talk about. And so people who were what started out as ecologists turned into rabid environmentalists who are now doing what they're doing. And as Larry says, the number of times, that I have heard about the end of the world. I mean, think about this man, Al Gore, right, who is just held up as a freaking paragon of, environmentalism. He made what is still considered a great documentary where he faked a lot of stuff in 2004, where he said in 2014 we'd all be underwater. That date sort of came and went. I mean, the number of times. And he had people thinking that 2012 was going to kill us all because the Mayan calendar ended. A calendar? From a people who, it's just ridiculous. But people thought that. How many times in my lifetime I have heard or read that we were all going to die from something, and it never came true. All that happened was they pushed the date back 5 to 10 years. Larry says Star Trek, the original series, had an episode with an overpopulated planet. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. That was one where they were trying to get some kind of virus from Kirk so that they could introduce it to the population and kill them all. Population isn't that much of a problem because of the modern science behind agriculture. It allows the people in my part of the country to literally feed the world. And it's only getting better. It's only getting better and better. And we do, in fact, see now some population dips. Yes, Laura Marshall says, to be fair, it was a big, scary calendar, talking about the calendar for the Mayans. You know, it's just a number. It's just a number. That's all it meant. And anybody who went on about the Mayans just didn't know what they were talking about. The Mayans were an interesting people from a historical standpoint, and that's really about all you can say. Well, I'll tell you what, I'll bring up some of the stuff that is usually considered very thorny subjects when it comes to the zero aggression principle. Because you're dealing with a potential society that would not have a standing military. And I think in, what I like to call Libertopia, a military would be made up of private militias, made up of local militias that train together, and if necessary, if there is some kind of actual invasion of one's territory, they come together as an army if necessary. And in fact, this is exactly how things operated until Abraham Lincoln. He federalized the armies and the navies during the Civil War. When you hear about John Wilkes Booth shouting, Sic semper tyrannis, he was not talking about the freedom of slaves and all that in the South. He was talking about the stuff that Lincoln did, like that, and worse in some cases. He severely restricted free speech, got rid of the posse comitatus. He would have any northern press, news articles, or editorials that were against what he was doing, he would have shut down and destroyed. So when you hear Sic semper tyrannis, it's really not about slavery necessarily. It's about all that stuff that he was doing. And he was federalizing armies and navies that had previously belonged to state militias. And you have to remember that an army is only necessary if you're actually attacked. There isn't a need for a massive military because you wouldn't have designs on another nation. It's like, George Washington said, free trade with everyone and friendship to all. You don't need that in Libertopia. You don't need to have bases all over the world just so that you can project your power there. What you need to have is an armed populace who can come together as necessary to press off the invaders. And to be honest, have fun, really have fun invading a place where everyone has private weapons of any kind. I can only imagine invading Army force trying to go through the streets of New York City while people are shooting at them from any random window with, Thompson submachine guns, sniping them with rifles. Some of them might make it through, but I'm just trying to imagine this. You have armed force driving down the streets of, going down Times Square, and there's everybody in the universe pointing out their windows and shooting the hell out of them, So that's how I think a military would run. You really wouldn't need one most of the time. And when you did need one, in an armed populace, you have to remember, with anybody being able to carry any weapon they like, you would probably have people that practiced with those weapons just, by virtue of doing it. Again, I blame most of what I'm saying here on L. Neil Smith. He had a whole series of novels that are pretty obscure now, the first one of which was The Probability Brooch. And do go read that. It's a great novel. It shows you, in no uncertain terms, what Libertopia could be like. And his only problem is he's kind of wordy about it. He doesn't. It's not like the characters just discover some of the things about how this society works by virtue of being involved in it. It's more like there are places where they sit down at a table and talk about it, So it gets kind of wordy in that respect. But there's also a graphic novel of that done by Scott Beezer, who is another buddy of mine, who has never done a hit piece on me, unlike L. Neil Smith, who did when I said to him, Neil, this doesn't make any damn sense. This runs totally counter to everything you've ever written up to this point. And then he did a hit piece on me. I didn't respond back to him because it was beneath my dignity. Words on a screen, didn't care. But it did kill our friendship, kind of. But he did a whole series of novels on this that started out in what would have been about the 1980s and goes through about another 150 years into space travel, into faster than light travel, and it's a whole series. People like to call it the Galactic Confederacy because it's not really any government involved. They just call themselves a loose association of people, individuals. You sometimes get to the idea of power generation in a zero aggression principle society. Without government, power would probably, at this stage of the game, be nuclear. It really is safe, clean, and generates a ton of power. In the accidents that we've seen happen, it's because something was not engineered correctly, or like in Chernobyl, God, everything was wrong with that. Just everything was wrong with that. Modern nuclear generators don't do that. They're safe, they're clean, they generate a ton of power. The main thing you have to remember about one, if you want to make sure that they're going to operate fine, is don't put them on a fault line. That's what happened with the Japanese. It was not anything wrong with the generator. It was the fact that they had it on a freaking fault line. You put something on a fault line, it's going to be a problem if you have an earthquake that, in their case, created a tidal wave and other things. And yeah, then you're going to get problems. But if you take the things and you stuck, say, 15 of them in the middle of Wyoming, the only thing that's a danger in Wyoming is if the Yellowstone caldera blows. If the Yellowstone caldera blows, we have a lot more problems. And in fact, any problems with the nuclear plants take care of themselves, because the pyroclastic flow on that reached across at least the entirety of what is currently Wyoming, and probably 2/3 or so into Iowa. I'm sorry, not Iowa, but South Dakota, Nebraska, etc. The pyroclastic flow is superheated gas and ash that is flowing at roughly the speed of sound. You put 10 or so nuclear plants out there, if that thing blows, they're done for. And there's nothing to worry about. You do have to worry about getting some infrastructure out there to get the power back. But put it someplace like that. There are lots and lots of places. There is a nuclear plant here in Nebraska, at Nebraska City, and it's been running my entire life. I know about it a little bit because my father used to make some of his living. He ran his own business as a psychologist. And what you always have to do in those things is you have to go and psychologically test every single one of the employees on a regular basis. And he did a lot of that testing. And that place has been running for my entire life. With absolutely no problems whatsoever. And I assume that they update those generators and reactors as the technology gets better. And it's been doing a bang-up job with no problems for 50-plus years. You need water for nuclear energy? Yeah, you do need some. But what a lot of people don't know is this whole part of the country is sitting on top of the North Platte aquifer. This is an underground source of water where we get all of our water, where everybody in Nebraska, South Dakota, probably most of Kansas, big, huge chunks of Wyoming. It is a giant aquifer. It's filled with water and is in no danger of disappearing. All you got to do is dig deep enough, and boom, you're into the aquifer. And that's exactly what cities and towns here do. So if you put them in Wyoming, I really don't think there'd be a problem. Just dig down. It's not really an issue. Half a sec. Yeah, my chair is old. About the best thing I can do is rotate it a few degrees and hope that causes it not to drop anymore. But I think in Libertopia you would have very safe, very clean nuclear energy. The problem with nuclear energy now is that my parents' generation and my generation were so afraid of nuclear energy. We had the stupid idea, I didn't because I know enough about it, but we had this stupid idea that a problem with the nuclear reactor would cause a nuclear explosion. That a meltdown meant boom. And that's not what it means at all. Just look over at Fukushima. They had an actual meltdown. Problem, huge problem for them locally, but not a giant explosion. And it did not really contaminate much of anything except the immediate area. And again, don't put them on a fault line, and you're probably fine. Other things that sort of come up in a Libertopia type world is space travel. Larry says, fear is promoted all the time. Yes, I was very, very happy. I had occasion to pick up a couple of hippies. I didn't even know hippies still existed, but these guys were clearly, hippies of the stoner variety, right? I picked them up because at the time I was living in Redfield, Iowa, and the exit from Redfield, Iowa, the highway that goes to Redfield, onto Interstate 80, which is a huge major thoroughfare between Chicago all the way out to San Francisco. Some idiot had dropped them off on that exit, and there isn't even a convenience store there. The people who are driving past there oftentimes don't even go off. And I'm under something that people may have heard me on the stream here, may have heard me talk about before, which is the obligation. Goes back a ways. When I was 19 years old, I was out working in a boys' camp in Minnesota, near Brainerd, Minnesota. Really exclusive boys' camp. We had a kid, for example, whose last name was Hershey, and he flew into Brainerd on a private jet. Yes, that kind of Hershey. I mean, it was that sort of people. And my first job when I got there, talked to people, and they immediately put me behind a hand-pushed mower to mow the forest. That's, what you did for these kids. So I'm out there, and what I used to do is I would hitchhike 20 or so miles into town, into Brainerd, from where that place was. And on my way back one time, tornado warning went off. Now, tornado warning meant at that time one had been sighted on the ground. And being out in the middle of nowhere, on the side of the road is not a good place to be. The best you can do is dive into the ditch if a problem happens. So I'm out there, and I'm kind of walking back, and I'm, just have my thumb out as I'm going. And a guy stopped, and he picked me up, and he took me all the way to the camp gates, which was well out of his way. And he said that it was his obligation that for help he had once received, he must in return help 10 others, each of whom would then help 10 others, so that good deeds would spread out like ripples from a pebble in a pond. And if you've ever watched Kung Fu, you saw that exact thing there. But I swear to you, this actually happened to me. So I saw these two hippies by the side of the road, and I thought, well, here comes the obligation. These guys are in trouble. They're never going to get a ride here. So I picked them up and then told them my story and said, and now I'm passing this obligation on to you. And we're driving back. We're driving along the road, and I knew where they were headed. If I'd had the time, if I didn't need to be someplace, I'd have taken them all the way. But I took them to a very large truck stop where I knew they could find a ride where they were going. Because it wasn't that far, from where we were. Probably 2.5 hours drive. But I picked them up, and we were talking about this whole concept of energy generation, and they said they wanted nuclear. And my jaw just about dropped, because I went, oh, thank God. Even hippies of the next generation understand that nuclear is the way to go. So I think in Libertopia, we would have a lot of nuclear power plants that would be run by private companies and be producing quite a lot of energy. We'd still have cars and things like that, but, no coal-fired or oil-fired plants. What would be the point? The amount of energy that you can get out of nuclear is so much greater. You throw up a bunch of those around the country, and you don't need coal or oil-fired anymore. And that would also bring down the price of gasoline, by the way, because if you're not using oil by the gajillions in these plants, that means you're going to have a lot more of the supply. It's going to be a supply and demand issue. Supply goes up, demand stays the same. You're going to have lower prices. And in the long run, not immediate, because there's really no good way to put the kind of energy into a car that gasoline does with an internal combustion engine. When they talk about batteries, that's all nonsense. That's one of the reasons I'd love AOC to take me up on my offer. I would love to drive her across the state of South Dakota, timing when a battery-powered vehicle would go out, stopping, and then waiting 4 hours, like you'd have to do for a charge. Just waiting, sitting there and say, okay, we're going to stop now. We're going to imagine we're an electric vehicle. We have just run out of charge. We're going to pull over at the next exit. We're going to sit there for 4 hours as if we were charging. I don't think you're going to do that. But eventually, there comes something. Some brainy individual who was not working under restrictions of government laws and regulations would come up with something that would allow us to at least make those engines far more efficient, or would replace them with some other power that I can't even imagine right now. Who knows? Maybe all our troubles are solved, like in Stargate SG-1 when we found a 0-point module. If we can tap into that, our troubles are all over. There are some nuclear generators that are pretty small. My father often suggested, before he passed away, that what you do is you take one of those and put them into a car, and essentially you have the engine for life. If you want a new car, you swap the engine out into a new chassis, and you've got a new car. But you keep the power for life. You could certainly have something, and that's the thing. If you let this go, then they're going to keep making this stuff smaller and more efficient, to the point where you can maybe have one in your home, and forget about all the plants. When you're not hamstrung by a government, when you're not hamstrung by regulations, you just let your engineers go and do what they want. Who knows what you're going to come up with? Even today, cars. Right, they're so heavily regulated that even making engineering changes to them have to be gone through a government thing. You cannot just make engineering changes to a car. You have to make the engineering changes, submit them for review. It takes forever. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. When you don't have that, then you're going to have engineers just letting their imaginations loose, and things are going to shoot out scientifically. I often say I'd like to work on it now that there's underground people doing it. I'd like to work on perfecting the gyrojet. This was a pistol, and there was a carbine version when it was made in the 1960s that did not fire a conventional bullet round. It fired a small missile. The problem with them was that the manufacturing of the time could not create, you needed to put spin on it, right, to be accurate. And so you had to make little nozzles on it that were at angles that created the spin. Well, they couldn't do that back then. It was just, you couldn't reliably manufacture things to the higher tolerances that you needed. Good 3D printers, however, probably can manufacture them. So I'd like to see the gyrojet perfected. So, let engineers run wild with that sort of thing. Redo the gyrojet. Make it plastic. A gyrojet, since it's firing a small missile, essentially, doesn't have to be. They used to test those things by firing them through toilet paper tubes, just the cardboard. It doesn't have to be anything that's bad. There's no recoil. Because the difference is, instead of having this giant acceleration like you do with a conventional firearm, you get the acceleration out, and the thing actually reaches its peak acceleration after it's left the barrel. So you just need something that'll fire start the thing moving. I think it's an interesting idea. I think it probably is at this point something that you could perfect. And if I had the engineering know-how, I would do that. I would perfect the gyrojet. I think it's perfectible now. Larry says, nuclear power was huge in the culture in the 1950s in magazines, etc. Yeah, that's one of the things that I always like to tell people. I'm involved in Star Trek online stuff and online forums and stuff like that. And a lot of people now, and I get it. A lot of people now look at Star Trek, the original series, and they see it as camp and fake and phony looking because of the technology. What they don't understand is that in the 1950s and 1960s, like you're saying, Larry, the expectation of science fiction authors and futurists of that time was that we were going to have a massive breakthrough in power, that nuclear energy was going to become very commonplace, and that so power was going to be where we saw the giant breakthrough. We didn't see that. What we saw was a breakthrough in information technology, and they could never have predicted that in the 50s and 60s. For them, the IBM computers that filled a warehouse, that was a computer, and that was the way it's always going to stay. They never expected to see what we have today, where we have, as I say repeatedly, more power in our more computing power in our pockets than it took to put man on the moon. Larry says, as you said, 3D printers will negate any controls on gun ownership. Absolutely. Eventually, as those things mature more and more, they are essentially Star Trek's replicators. The really high-end ones and medical-grade ones can 3D print living cells. If you can do that, you're not far off from printing food. They really have, 3D printers really have the potential to completely change life on Earth. It has the potential to completely eliminate hunger and completely eliminate want as that matures. And the same thing can be said of weapons. There's a place where you can download the lower receiver of various types of guns that have been 3D printed, or the plans for them, or upper receivers rather, and it's, that's what's going to happen. That's what, you're absolutely right, Larry. That's what's going to happen. Yeah, and Larry says that he couldn't foresee the microchip. Yeah, 1950s, 1960s, transistors were the huge breakthrough, but that still meant your computer was gigantic. If you look at cutaway drawings and stuff like that made of that era, the computer is always shown as a giant core that runs several decks through the center of the saucer section of the Enterprise. Not the case anymore. In the Abrams movies, that whole area has been replaced with essentially a revolving circular spiral staircase that leads to different decks on the Enterprise, because you don't, in today's technology, that's not what you would have for computers. They're getting it wrong there too. 20 years from now, what they call 3D printing. I'm sorry, not 3D printing. Quantum energy teleportation, which isn't exactly what it is. It's a quantum entanglement sort of deal. You take two atoms, and using a particular type of laser and frequency, you essentially replicate the state. You have an atom here with a certain energy state, and you replicate it precisely over here. And if you take these atoms at a distance, and you make a change in this one, it's replicated over here regardless. It's some quantum entanglement that we don't quite understand. But that has the potential to completely revolutionize everything about IT. Because once you can change things at the atomic level, for me, I can immediately see it as data. If you can change an atomic state here that represents a 1, then it becomes a 1 over here. Change it to a 0, becomes a 0 over here. You're not left with anything like what we think of as networking. No wires, no Wi-Fi, no radios, no 4G, 5G, nothing. And then you put those into chips, and you're getting down to things that are fantastically small. What we've got in our phone is only the beginning. That has the technology, that has the capability to completely revolutionize everything about how we do computers. And along with 3D printing, I think we're at a point where we're revolutionizing much of what it is to be human. If you don't have to worry about where your food is coming from, and you can make almost anything that you want out of your 3D printer, you've got Star Trek's replicator, and it changes what it is to be human. People are not going to be hungry anymore, eventually, when that stuff is, finally matures as a technology. But we're getting there. We're getting there. It gets better and better every year. I wish I could afford a 3D printer or three. There's one out there that I really get a kick out of. It's a 3D printer that's relatively inexpensive, a few $100s, but you can use it to print higher tolerance parts for itself. So you can make a better 3D printer out of the 3D printer that you're buying. You know, I get a huge kick out of that one. A lot of interesting stuff there. Larry says the transporter has been theorized that you copy yourself at the other end and destroy the original. Yeah. In Star Trek, that is something that was first brought up in the first adult Star Trek novel, Spock Must Die. That was something that James Blish, the author of that, actually brought up. It was a conversation between McCoy and Scotty about what happens. Am I really the same person? You know, you're taking me and because that's the way that he talked about it, right? It was not turning matter to energy and beaming it. The way that James Blish thought about it, again, pre anything that we consider Star Trek canon, it was just the 78 episodes of TV, 79. And so he expanded on that, and he said, Scotty said, no, we're not actually converting you to energy. It's called a Dirac jump, which at that point would have been what we now call quantum entanglement. So yeah, it was a thing he brought up back then. Maybe the Star Trek's transporter is actually replicating an energy state over here and destroying the original. So it's like a murder machine. We're at no point, and I don't know that we'll ever be at a point where you could replicate an entire human body's energy state somewhere else. But if you did, you just end up with an exact duplicate. Whose energy states would be replicated from one to the other. So it gets weird, but I don't know that you'd ever be able to do it with a human. But interestingly enough that we go that direction, because I did have some stuff that I have prepared on space travel in Libertopia. It is my firm conviction that we will never get off this rock with government. Government actively, intentionally or not, it actively inhibits space travel. It requires massive funding, and this requires a public will for that funding. And there has been no public will for space travel, not in any major way, since the end of the Apollo missions. In fact, they had more Apollo missions planned, but they lost the public will and therefore all the funding, and so they canceled them. And there has been no significant public will ever since. Trump has this notion of a space force. Maybe that'll get off the ground, but only because the Chinese are headed up there. And you do not want the Chinese controlling space. That would be bad, okay? So that's going on there. There's no real movement on that other than creating a general of the Space Force. But there may be movement on it in the future. Hopefully, somebody in Congress sometime has read Heinlein's book, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress. While it's not something we can presently exactly do, the way the moon gets their independence is by lobbing rocks at Earth. You have a lot of rocks on the moon, and if you can accelerate them, get them off into escape velocity, and make sure that your target and trajectory are right, you simply are dropping a big old rock straight into Earth's gravity well. It's a hell of a lot easier to drop something down Earth's gravity well than it is to get something up in Earth's gravity well. So hopefully somebody's read that, because that's outside of our capability right now, but it won't be for long. We'll be able to do stuff like that. I mean, they're starting to use rail guns on naval ships, which is a form of that technology. We'll be doing it eventually. And you do not want the Chinese up there, because what happens is you're up there, if you don't have a big space capability, there's nothing you can do. You just sit down, get in the bunkers, and hope that you don't destroy it completely. In Heinlein's novel, they talk about destroying Cheyenne Mountain completely. Larry says, Hal had 3 more missions with all the hardware. Yes, they were ready to go with 3 more missions on the Apollo missions, and they were canceled because there is no public will for it and therefore no funding. Julie Thompson, hi, nice to see you today. The Chinese are doing a lot to court Musk. Can easily see SpaceX moving there. Talking about moon bases by 2022. Let me get into that, because Musk, he's selling a bill of goods here. I think in reality, private space travel will be doing the job. It will do it for a profit. In Libertopia, it would certainly be the case. You would be mining the moon, which is difficult. I'll explain that in a second. And certainly mining asteroids, but that's even more difficult. There's probably not much profit in other planets. In reality, Mars kind of sucks. Venus really sucks. The gas giants are totally inhospitable, although the rings of Saturn might be mineable. And the thing about space travel is one small mistake and you are dead. Life on Earth thrives because we evolved to live in this environment, right? None of that in space. One tiny mistake and you are dead. We are not built to live anywhere other than where we are right now. And you make one tiny mistake out there with any number of technical things and you are dead. In terms of Mars, and here's where we get to some extent into the moon bases and Musk. Musk talks about these moon bases, and people talk about these moon bases, and we don't know a lot of things to begin with. We don't know if the human body can adapt to Mars's lower gravity. What we do know is the human body does not function well in zero or near microgravity, because we have astronauts that come back from very extended missions from the ISS, and they have serious, permanently debilitating problems physically, and that includes things up to and including bone marrow issues, right? So surviving in microgravity, even for the couple of years that they send those people up there, that becomes problematic. The Expanse books and TV series show workers out in the asteroids. I've been catching up on that. I know that when I was doing reviews of this, occasionally people would ask me. I've been binging that. They have asteroids and stuff that apparently are spinning. In order to get that 1G, and sometimes when they're out in space a lot with very little gravity, except when they're under acceleration. Again, the problem is, and they don't address it in those books either, we don't know if you can survive in those. We just don't know. What we do know is it's really bad in extended microgravity up in the ISS. Really bad. We don't know how it would be on a lower gravity planet. We don't know if we can live. We can actually survive, for example, on the moon. Maybe that level of gravity is just enough. Maybe it's not. We don't know. That is something that has to be studied before we even think about doing this in a huge way. You need to send some people up there as guinea pigs, and if they come back completely screwed up or are screwed up while they're there, well, then we know we have a problem. And we don't have artificial gravity. We don't even have an understanding really of how gravity works. A lot of theories, but we don't really understand it. So that's one of the biggest things. We just don't know if our bodies can stand that. It may be that we are stuck with 1G, and until we can figure out a way to keep 1G around us most of the time, we are going to have problems. We just don't know. Larry says, we thought our eyeballs would pop out during launch. Yeah, there was, all kinds of, the reason Apollo 11 was the one that landed on the moon is because the first 10 were test vehicles. We'd never done that before. We didn't know if we could get something off the ground without it exploding. And in fact, a ton of stuff that we did send up did explode. So they had to test being able to get it up in the first place. They had to be able to test whether or not you could put those vehicles on it. They had to be able to test whether or not you could dock those vehicles. Had to be able to test all of this stuff before you actually put somebody on the ground. And even when they did, if you listen to the radio transmissions and you understand what's going on in the background, Neil Armstrong was piloting that, first man on the moon, piloting that lunar excursion module down, running almost on fumes by the time he got. You can hear the ground control at Houston ticking off the seconds until he has no fuel. He barely made it. If you know what's going on, it's really fascinating to listen to, and still to me almost riveting, because you're going, okay, Neil, okay, you got to get it down now. Run on fumes, Neil. Get the thing down, So all of that stuff has to be tested. When he landed, they didn't even know for sure. Nixon had a speech prepared in case they didn't make it, in case they died somehow. Our first people on Mars, without doing a lot more research, will almost certainly die, and not in good ways. Apollo 2 through 6 were unmanned test missions. Yep, that's exactly right. There were all these components that we had never made before, and they had to be tested out. It's things like people think about rotating space stations. Oh, that's got to be easy. No, it's not. There are 5 bajillion things that you would have to test out before you could put them together as a rotating space station. You can't just have a big blueprint, go up into space and build it. Most people don't understand how difficult it is to even use a tool in space, right? Here on Earth, if you want to use a wrench, you're working against gravity, right, to turn something. Up in space, in microgravity, you try to turn something, and all that's going to happen is you're going to move. You have to have specialized tools, in space. You get for every action is an equal and opposite reaction. You yank this way, that's going to cause you to move, not necessarily the bolt. So all of that stuff, we can't. It's probably within our, engineering capabilities to build something like that, but we couldn't do it all at once. We would have to test out individual parts for a long, long time before we got there. It's why the ISS is really a bunch of cobbled together pieces that, we do a lot of testing up there, but nothing like you would need for a real rotating space station. It'll give you 1G by virtue of centrifugal force. So, other things that you have problems with on Mars and also on the moon to some extent, radiation. There's very little atmosphere on Mars. It does not stop the deadly radiation that our atmosphere does. So you need to live in radiation-proof domes and wear rad-proof environmental suits whenever you go outside. You cannot make air. You would have to bring it all with you. Recycling air is extremely difficult and is something that you lose more air as you do it. We can't do this at the moment. And you could not do it with what you find on Mars. You cannot create an air that people can breathe based on what you have on Mars. You want air? You're going to bring it all with you. If you plan to colonize the planet, you're bringing all the air for that colony with you. And of course, water is very scarce on Mars. There's some at the poles that we know about, so you could maybe colonize there. But then you'd have to treat the hell out of the water. I guarantee Martian water is going to be filled with junk that people can't eat, can't drink. You can't just carve off a piece of Martian ice, melt it, and drink it. I'm dead certain there's got to be things in there because it's an alien planet. It's not one that we were evolved to live in. I'm dead certain there are things in there that would be deadly to human beings, and you would have to treat the hell out of it. And so unless you put colonies there near that are capable of treating all that water. Again, something we have never done. These are things you would have to test out before you send people there. Otherwise, their likelihood is they'd die. Unless you do that and treat all that stuff, you're going to have to bring all your own water, and then you're going to have to recycle it all. Fortunately, that's something we kind of can do right now. But for an entire colony, we have never tested anything like that. And food, you can't grow most crops on Mars. The soil is really bad. It's essentially volcanic ash that has no nutrients that we need for plant life. Now, on Earth, in laboratories, they have attempted to replicate Mars environments and have grown things like yellow sweet clover, carrots, field mustard, and leopard's bane. And that's about all. The soil just won't work for most crops. So if you want things like corn, you're going to have to bring the soil with you. Millions of tons of soil you will have to bring with you. And then you're going to have to put them in giant domes with air that you're going to have to bring with you. Larry says, Arnold found all that underground ice we can vaporize to terraform Mars. Well, terraforming a planet is something we have never attempted before. We don't know that we can do that. And if we did, it would probably take hundreds, if not more, years. That is an interesting sounding project in science fiction, but unless you have the Genesis device from Star Trek, it is not going to be anything like an instantaneous process. Arnold talking about that underground ice, yeah. From that movie, no, that doesn't exist. Most of the ice that we know about on Mars is on the poles. We don't know that we could drink it. My guess is, you have to remember, this is an alien planet. It's going to have alien things on it that we don't presently understand. I always like to point out to people, right, when I was first born, from Earth-bound telescopes, scientists guessed that Mars would probably be habitable, but a thin atmosphere, and that Venus would probably be habitable, but that it would be very jungle, very dense with jungle stuff. And then later on in my life, we sent probes, and we found out the truth, that Venus is an unlivable place. One of L. Neil Smith's book, called The Venus Belt, has a private company doing probably the best thing you could do with Venus. And that's smashing it with some object, some asteroid, so large that it turns the planet into an asteroid belt. That is probably the best use that we could think of for Venus. It is a completely uninhabitable place. Mars is largely uninhabitable. It's not as bad as Venus, where if you land on the ground, you couldn't even wear suits that would keep you alive more than a few minutes, and you wouldn't be able to move in them anyway. It'd just be a giant block of, I don't know what they use to. They've gotten some landers down on the planet. They don't last very long. So I don't know what they cover them with, but that's what you'd have to be covered in. 10 times thicker, you probably wouldn't move. So you would have to, when you're colonizing Mars, again, if you want meat, you're going to have to bring your livestock with you, in the hundreds or millions worth. And we don't know if that livestock can adapt to Mars's lower gravity. Maybe they'd have problems the same as human beings might. We don't know. And you would need to feed them. You can't just grow grains there. You're going to have to bring lots of soil for feed grains and stuff like that. Maybe you can get something like those few things to work in Martian soil, but very little. Corn, feed grain, feed corn, no. You're going to have soil that you bring with you, and you're going to have to put it down pretty deep, because the roots from things like corn go down deep. And you have to bring a certain type of soil. You can't go out to South Dakota and pull up soil and bring it to Mars, because that soil is such that will only grow grass. It is why it is a natural prairie. You have to go farther east into like Iowa, and then you have a soil that can grow corn and other crops. So you have to bring the right kind, you have to bring it in enormous quantities, and you have to constantly use water to get these things to work. So you have to constantly water them. You have to constantly water your livestock. You're going to have to recycle all of that stuff, and have to put the livestock in big old domes with air that you're going to have to bring with you, and lots of it. When you get into space travel, what Elon Musk is talking about sounds fun, but he overlooks all of these things that we have never, ever done any kind of research on. I think the best first step, if you're going to do something, and in Libertopia, I think that's what would happen with private companies, the best first step would be to try to set up a small base on Mars. On the moon, and send astronauts up there for a long time and see what happens to them. With the understanding, you tell the guys in advance, or girls, tell them in advance, you're almost certainly going to die from something. If you screw up, if you make one screw up, technically everybody dies. If you fail to Make sure your suit is completely airtight when you walk out the airlock. You're going to die. If your suit gets punctured by a micrometeorite, which happens all the time on the moon, that's another thing you have to worry about, both on the moon and Mars, is meteorites. In Earth, we have this nice, wonderful atmosphere that's large enough so that, meteorites of a certain size just burn up in the atmosphere. You have to get a pretty big one before they don't burn up in the atmosphere. And even then, by the time they hit the ground, they're not that big. We always have the potential for a very large one to hit Earth the way apparently killed off the dinosaurs. That's always a possibility. But, every day, I didn't even know how many micrometeorites burn up in the atmosphere, and small meteorites just bang into the Earth and make a small rock. On the moon, on Mars, no atmosphere to speak of like that. Not going to stop it. It's just going to slam right in. Micrometeorite the size of this coming in at the velocity of a bullet or larger, tears through your suit, you're done. You're just done. You're going to die. So for me, a first good step would be to put something on the moon, see if we can survive that gravity, see if we can, even do things up there, see if we can recycle air, see if we can do anything in terms of growing food. Do we need to bring our own soil? What happens when we put livestock up there? We don't even know for sure what happens if you grow corn in anything other than 1G. What happens to corn when it's in some other gravity? Will it even look like corn? Will it produce ears of corn in the way that we expect? We don't know any of these things. These are all things that have to be, tested somewhere relatively near to us before we send them off someplace on Mars. Yeah, and like I say, I think the moon would probably be a good base. And in Libertopia, I think we'd probably have that by now. Don't think we get the flying cars yet, although we might at some point. But imagine, again, we now have a government. They would be regulating the frack out of flying cars. I can't even imagine. Just getting a trike, which is a small, basically one-person aircraft. They call it a trike. Getting a trike, that has rules and regulations about it. Can you imagine a flying car, the kind of rules and regulations there would be? You would probably have to get pilot's licenses and all of that, and it would turn into just another small aircraft. So that's what I think about space travel, Julie. And I hate to say that in this respect, Elon Musk is being something of a con man, but he is. He has been a con man on several occasions. The Hyperloop, for example. I invite you to look at videos by a guy named Thunderfoot with 2 zeros. This is an actual scientist who has worked both as an astronomer and in many respects with vacuums. There's no way that Elon Musk could or ever will build a Hyperloop, and all of his testing has proven this. It is an abandoned project. He then got into these tunnels where he thought, okay, you're going to take a car down an elevator and put it on this track, and it's going to zoom through underground Los Angeles and get from one place to another. He abandoned that. That turned into tunnels, just regular old tunnels. Sold a bill of goods on that one, and Missouri, I was living in Iowa when they did it. Missouri got stupid and invested hundreds of millions of dollars in a Hyperloop. Blew the money completely. That's not coming around. There are too many issues involved in creating relatively small vacuum areas that can be destroyed. A single point of failure will kill everyone in them at the speed of sound. Again, look at these videos by Thunderfoot. He's done a really good job of this. And he, on occasion, has gone out to the Hyperloop test track to look at it. Just looking at it as a neophyte, I know that what they've got there is not engineered correctly. And the test vehicles they've sent through there, the test vehicles have been pushed by basically an electric car sort of thing behind them, shoves them along, gets them up to speed, lets them go, and typically the test vehicles will not reach the end of the Hyperloop tube, they will go 50 to 60 feet. So that's one where he's selling you a bill of goods. The other thing is electric cars. Electric cars are fine when you're in a major metropolitan area. They're absolutely useless where I live. I used to drive from Des Moines to Chicago because my ex had custody of kids, so I would drive there a couple of times a month, sometimes more. That is roughly a 5-hour drive if you're driving an internal combustion engine through nothing but agricultural land. And I'd have to stop. I would usually fill up in Iowa because it was so much cheaper, get to the Iowa border, fill up again there, because the moment you get across the border, the price of gas, because of their taxes and stuff, would jump 25 to 50 cents. So that's the fueling that I had to do, and to make a 5-hour drive. If I was doing it in an electric car, God, I don't know, a couple of 100 miles, stop, wait 4 hours, a couple of 100 miles, stop, wait 4 hours. No, that doesn't work here. And in particular, it doesn't work in agriculture itself. Farmers and ranchers use a lot of heavy equipment, combines and things like that. You know, it's not a horse and plow. It is large, heavy equipment that run on diesel fuel. And the reason that it runs on diesel fuel is you cannot get batteries that are going to power that thing for any length of time. And if you tried, and this is why AOC is such a moron with respect to the Green New Deal, she wants to outlaw all this stuff and make it electric. If you did, the amount of downtime that would be created in farmers and ranchers would mean a huge, huge drop in the output of food. And you would starve upwards of 1 billion people because of it. You need diesel-powered stuff. And electricity sometimes isn't even reliable out in places like that. It is sometimes so remote, and this is, again, why I'd like to give AOC a tour, as you can see. It is sometimes so remote that electricity is not always available. Electricity may go down because power lines drop in the middle of the winter when you got 2 feet of snow, and nobody's going to get out there to fix it for a week or more. You know, you are stuck with no electricity, and people make arrangements for that respect in the winter times. You need, what they have on ranches and stuff are huge tanks that they are filled from time to time with those tanker trucks that you see with diesel fuel stuck in them. The diesel fuel tanker truck comes around to various farms and ranches and fills up these giant tanks that they have with diesel fuel. And then they use those tanks to put into their own very heavy equipment. So, you know, the electric cars, again, great for, you know, if you're going short distances in cities. Totally useless outside of that. And that's part of the reason he's having problems. And he will never be able to create a combine that runs on electricity. It's impossible. The batteries can only hold a certain amount of energy before they explode. And you can't put enough batteries into a combine to make it run from dawn until dusk, which is what they do. Farmers and ranchers work when there's light. And the only light there is from that big glowing ball in the sky. So they basically work dawn to dusk. And if you stick giant batteries that are going to run dead in 4 or 5 hours on a huge combine, A, you're increasing its weight beyond what you really need or can use, and B, you're going to create downtime when they have to recharge it, and C, what if it's the dead of winter and they have no electricity? You know, happens even in the summer sometimes. You know, it's just not necessarily all that reliable. So Elon Musk is not what he seems to be. I think he's great in terms of what he's doing with SpaceX at the moment. I think that we will not get off this rock without somebody like Elon Musk doing that. When he starts talking about Mars, when he starts talking about hyperloops, and when he starts talking about anything other than just a plain old tunnel, he's selling you a bill of goods sometimes. And I very much hope that those sorts of things do not come and taint his SpaceX projects, because those are going somewhere. If I were him, I'd dump all the other stuff. I would stop making ridiculous, claims about what we're going to do on Mars in only a few years, because that's just not possible. We have too much research to do. You send somebody to Mars now, I guarantee they will die, and it won't be nice. If they were smart, when they got to the point where they were starting to feel a lot of pain, they would simply get into one of their suits and reduce the oxygen down to where they would just fall asleep. Because otherwise you could wind up with bone marrow problems. We don't know. We have no idea. So off on another topic of zero aggression principle stuff that always people get to. And it is a thorny, thorny, thorny subject. Have a second again. It is an extremely thorny subject, and it's when you get to weapons of mass destruction. You know, right now, one of the things government does is, to some extent, regulate the weapons of mass destruction. However, I would point out to you that the only people who have ever used weapons of mass destruction have been governments. So what you kind of have to think of in terms is positive uses for weapons of mass destruction. If you are a private individual, private company, and you want to make money, there is no profit in mass death. You get too many dead people. You get too much, if it's a nuclear weapon, you get too much radiation. If you bomb your cities, you're killing your customers, and you're creating an area that's radioactive that nobody will ever be able to live in for a long time. If you bomb your agricultural area, you're losing potential food, and you starve out your cities. Interesting thing, for most of the Cold War, the nuclear silos were located in agricultural areas. Where my grandparents' ranch was, in order to get there, you would pass 3 nuclear missile silos out in the middle of it. And my father, there was a control place, a nuclear missile control station. And my father would go there, and he would get airmen to show him around the inside. Completely against regulations. It was totally against regulations. If they'd been found out, they'd have been court-martialed and sent to Fort Leavenworth in about 5 seconds. But they were so bored that when a 12-year-old, 15-year-old kid showed up, they would say, "Oh, sure, we'll show you around." So my father got to see the interior of one of those. It's now actually a monument. You can go out in South Dakota. You can drive out and see it. It's now a monument. All of those things have been cemented over. But in order to get to where my grandparents' ranch was, you went past 3 nuclear missile silos. That is a stupid thing to do. They should have put the nuclear missile silos right in the middle of cities. Because if the primary targets for the Soviets during the Cold War were large population centers, but they were also wherever it was that your nuclear missiles were. So look at this. You shoot your agricultural area to destroy those missiles, and you irradiate the agricultural area for hundreds of miles around probably, and you've lost your agriculture. Even if your cities stay intact, they're going to starve because they have no food. The best thing they could have done would be to put those nuclear missile silos right in the middle of cities, so that if the cities are blown up, at least you have the possibility of recovering with all your agricultural left. My father mentioned that, and I thought about it. I went, yeah, it's stupid to put those nuclear missiles out in the middle of ag area. That's dumb. Should have put them near the cities. They're going to be targeted anyway. So, Larry says that's where UFOs hang out, around those silos. Yeah, I guess. My own opinion. You want to know, and I've tried, I've honestly, if somebody can give me an idea about how to do this, I've tried to think about it, right? I think that the reason that we don't see a lot of we never see alien life forms or even evidence of it, has nothing to do with these various phases of technology where you start using more and more energy and eventually build a Dyson sphere and you get all the energy from your star. I don't think it's anything like that. I think what happens is you get to a certain point in your information technology where the virtual reality is identical to real life. And so, or better, it's controllable. A person has the cheat codes for the virtual reality that is indistinguishable from real life. And maybe you find out, you can't live anywhere except in your own gravity. Maybe we find out that we're kind of trapped on Earth, that until we actually get artificial gravity, maybe we're just stuck here. Maybe we can't survive on Mars. Maybe the human body can't do it. So in short order here, our own IT is going to be able to make things that are indistinguishable from the world around us in terms of what we feel, see, etc. It's going to be indistinguishable, except we will be able to control it. We will have the cheat codes. It'll be like in Minecraft, only 10 million times better. I think it's very possible that what happens is people, other civilizations, simply run into the limitations of reality. The speed of light is a hard limit, which means we are not going to go to Alpha Centauri anytime soon. If we did, we'd have to build generation ships and have cryosleep, neither of which we have right now. And it would be thousands of years getting there. It may just be that we're not leaving this solar system anytime soon. But at the meantime, our IT is becoming such that we will be able to create artificial realities for individuals, right? So every individual has their own artificial reality. I think maybe that's why we don't see aliens. Maybe it's because they've simply figured out they can't get around necessarily as fast as they can. They go into an artificial reality that is individual. Every single different individual in their universe, in their world, has their own artificial reality that they can tailor to be whatever kind of utopia that they think it is. And maybe they let other people share it. Maybe you get some MMORPGs, but to be honest, I doubt it. Why would you if everyone and everything that you can think of appears in your own artificial reality? Maybe that's just where aliens eventually end up, is something where everybody has their own little world that they can create. And why come out? You got 3D printers giving you food. Maybe you've got exercise type machines to keep your body from completely atrophying because you're sitting inside of a VR the entire time. Why would you come out? Why would you come out to a world that, isn't that great when you can create an entire world all of your own that suits your exact purpose? I think that way is where we're heading right now. But what I thought about is, I thought, okay, well, let's posit that this is the way we're heading. I'm retired. I have some time to do this, and I'm not sure I'd be good at it. But I thought, okay, what if you tried to set a story in that kind of universe, right? You have all these people that are just locked up. I thought, okay, what if there's a real murder, right? Somebody is actually killed by someone else. And I can't figure out a motive for why they do it. You come up with something like as simple as what if I wanted to make a detective story? And I can't, because in a world like that, why would you kill anybody? There'd be no reason to kill anyone. They'd be all in their own little universe. Why would you kill anybody? So somebody could give me a motive for murder. I'd like to write that story. So anyway, getting back to weapons of mass destruction, I think when you get into them, what you have to look at it from is not so much a perspective of, taking over everything. It's you use weapons of mass destruction, you kill your customers. And you kill them in a way that maybe somebody's going to want to kill you back. It becomes the same thing that we had in the Cold War, which is mutually assured destruction. To begin with, there's no money in it. There's no money in killing off all of your customers or killing off any customers. And so even if you killed off all your customers, well, somebody's probably going to want to start killing you. And maybe not using a weapon of mass destruction for it either. But also in terms of militaries, I think private citizens, certainly private companies, would own jet aircraft used for commerce, but that you could convert for wartime use, which, by the way, is what happened in World War I and World War II. You heard about companies that would be making other things that would then put themselves on a war footing, which meant that they were going to start building things that were necessary for war. See no reason why you couldn't do that in a military that's run by private individuals. You could have missiles. Again, these could be used for commerce. One of the things that Elon Musk wants to do, I don't know how necessarily practical it is, but is running people from point A to point B across continents, across oceans, in short periods of time using rockets. I think you could certainly do that. Ultimately, I think he's going to be able to do it. Maybe a while longer than he thinks, but I think he'll ultimately do it. So you could have essentially missiles, rockets that you use for commerce, but that could be converted into war. Navies, well, ships owned by private companies and would probably have some of their own protection. So you'd have some vessels that were set up for military. But again, you could convert things for wartime use. Again, you have to understand that this is in a world where you don't have all of these bases all over the world so we can project our power. We're just caring about ourselves. And if somebody invades, then you have to think about, okay, what can these private companies do to, create things? Satellites, obviously right now commercial companies do own them. They could also be converted to wartime use. You could, put things on them that would allow it to spy on the enemy and things like that. And then there's nukes, of course. There are lots of positive uses for nuclear weapons in things like excavation. There are nuclear weapons that you can use for excavation that do not leave behind much radiation for very long. There are positive uses for nuclear explosions. Instead of having to use multiple tons and tons of TNT, you can use small types of nuclear weapons that do not leave behind much of a radioactive footprint, or one that dissipates. The half-life is so short that it dissipates and you can leave. So there are industrial uses for them. And again, I don't know that you'd necessarily even see them in a war, because ultimately, if you're not a government trying to, conquer something and like that, you would probably use these things primarily peacefully. You wouldn't necessarily see them used in war. And if you did, well, you could convert them for wartime use. That wouldn't be that horrifying. You could do that. But those nuclear weapons and stuff, weapons of mass destruction, always becomes a very thorny issue for libertarians because, some people see government as basically the only answer for that. And it's a hard argument to argue against. But for me, the problem is you got a government doing anything, and it eventually just expands and expands and expands and expands. It took the United States federal government about 200 years to get to the point where it was starting to become nothing like what it was intended to be. Believe it or not, under the Constitution, every single state is its own sovereign nation, and with its own sovereign laws. What the Constitution really says is we will get together for a common defense, to have put up a common defense against an enemy, and we will make sure that trade happens between the states so that they don't do things like adding taxes to get between state and state. That's really all it does. And in a couple of hundred years, it evolved into the point where the federal government is all-encompassing. It now encompasses every aspect of our lives. It spies on us 24/7. Hi, guys at NSA. It spies on us 24/7. It's continuing to spy. It gets more and more spying constantly. Even, our large corporations, our technocracies are doing it. These are things that the federal government was never intended to do, and it took a couple of hundred years for it. And when you look over in Europe, the exact same thing is happening there. People like to talk about Brexit as if it's something that was being done because people are racist against the enormous number of Muslims that have been coming into Britain and other countries over there. Which I have to say, by the way, is a direct result of the United States toppling Saddam Hussein. The guy may have been a bad guy, but here's the thing. That entire region at the end of World War I was carved up for colonial powers. France got a chunk, UK got a chunk, etc. It was just carved up, more or less, just how the powers wanted it carved up. It was not carved up along cultural lines. This was an area that for a thousand years or more had been made up of nomadic tribes who warred on each other. It was very similar. I liken it to the way that Lewis and Clark described the American Indians when they first met them. They would find any given tribe, and that tribe would be at peace with 7 or 8 other tribes, but then at war with another dozen. And those wars had been going on for a long time, centuries. And that's kind of how that area was. And then you took it and you partitioned them out in a way that was not culturally based. You stuck people together who had been warring for 1,000 years. And Saddam Hussein was a brutal dictator. But if you're going to do what they did, a brutal dictator is necessary, because he has to be able to say, when these people start squabbling and shooting each other, go in and kill a few of them. And say, no, you don't either. So by taking Saddam Hussein out of the picture and thinking stupidly that the Iraqis would suddenly create a constitutional republic like ours was a stupid notion. That was never going to happen. It's one of the few times, by the way, that I was right with my dad. He and I would have arguments about what's going to happen with Iraq, and I said, they're not going to do that. They're not going to do that because they have no experience with it. They have never seen it, never done anything with it. They don't know anything about that way of life. And if you don't know about it, if you have not experienced something, then you cannot really imagine what it would be like. It's like telling people, like I do, imagine a world with no government. They can't. It's not something they have an experience with. They can't really wrap their head around it. So if you take these people who have only known a brutal dictator and you say, okay, now you're going to have a constitutional republic, and they're like, what the hell is that? I can't even conceive of what that would be like, So by taking him out, it destabilized that entire region. And ultimately, when you watch where the dominoes fell after that, resulted in this huge mass migration out of the Middle East and into Europe. And because Europe, like the United States, its member nations have to allow anybody to cross the borders, they all went to places like Germany, Europe, and all those other well-to-do places. And that's not at all what Brexit was about. I know a couple of guys at Brexit, and I get what it was about. What had happened was, in the short period of time that the EU had been in existence, and by the way, the EU has been in existence not that long. I don't remember when it was in existence, but maybe in the 1970s, I think was when it started. It took the EU only 50 or so years, less, 40 years or so, to do what the U.S. federal government did in a couple of hundred years. It took what was supposed to be sovereign nations that were getting together for trade and things like that, and maybe having a united front if there was a war, and became something where those member nations had absolutely no representation. They have an EU parliament, but that parliament has no power. The power actually resides in a very few number of people who are not elected. And so what Brexit really was about was getting out of that, was getting their sovereignty back. It was not, it was them being able to take control of their own lives rather than having this nebulous group of people that didn't necessarily do what the parliament even said, telling them how to live their lives. They wanted it back. That's all Brexit really was about. It would be as if, one of the states in the United States wanted to secede. Best explanation I ever heard about Brexit, a really funny one. There's a comedian out there who does this. He says, okay, Brexit is kind of like you're at Burger King. There's 5 of you at Burger King. And you go, hey, you want to leave Burger King? And they go, yeah, let's leave Burger King. And one of them says, well, wait a minute, let's talk to the manager about it. What? Okay, well, we need to talk to the manager and get a deal so that we can leave the Burger King. So he goes to talk to the manager, and he comes back and he says, okay, I think we can make a deal about leaving Burger King. And the rest of them are like, why don't we just leave Burger King? So the guy goes back to the manager, comes back 2 years later, and says to the people who want to leave Burger King, okay, I've set it up, we can leave Burger King, but we have to give the manager $1 billion. He says, that's Brexit. That's how Brexit has gone. And all they wanted was their sovereignty back. So that's really what Brexit was about. It's as if a state in the U.S. wanted to secede. I think it's a little different in the U.S. I think as a result of the Civil War, I think you probably would have a hard time. In reality, I think if the southern states had wanted to secede, if they simply had gone to the Supreme Court and said, we want to secede, rather than starting a fight, they probably would have been able to. They probably would have been able to. Constitutionally, there's nothing that says that states can't leave. There isn't even really anything that talks about how states can enter. But there's nothing that says they can't leave. And so I think they probably could have left legally. I don't know how that would go down today. I keep hoping, maybe California will secede, although that one is so problematic because they have so many military bases there and so much military Navy stuff going on there. What would you do if they seceded? I guess they just have to bomb the hell out of all the military bases in San Diego, pull the ships out, bomb the hell out of them. I don't know, so that the Californians couldn't use them themselves. I keep hoping that they'll leave. That would certainly be better for the rest of us. But, with California, in my opinion, they're in a race with Illinois to see which of them can go completely bankrupt first. I get a kick out of the fact. I know some about Illinois. I lived in Chicago for 10 years. My ex lives there. I went back and forth a lot with my kids when they were growing up. That is a state that is so broke that they can't even pay their lottery winners. Think of that. The easiest way in the universe for a state to make money is on a lottery, and they can't even pay their lottery winners. They pay them in IOUs. That's how freaking broke they are. They have a thing going where they want to split into like North and South Illinois, and I think that would probably be a good idea. The problem with Illinois is that everything is dominated by Chicago, and people in the other areas have no voice to speak of at all. That split would be good. A split from Northern and Southern California, or North, South, and Western California, or Eastern California, which is what I've heard also. That would probably be good. But I don't see it happening, unfortunately. But carving up some of those where you have large major metropolitan areas, carving them up so that the rest of their state, which currently has no voice because the metro area completely out-screams them on everything, that'd probably be a good thing. Don't see it happening, but it would probably be a good thing. Anyhow, that's the stuff that I have prepared. If anyone has any more questions, I'm happy to answer them. My thing always is I like to imagine, what would it be like if we didn't have government? Here's a good one I can talk about, too. Artificial intelligence. Marshall, you're into artificial intelligence. When we get into artificial intelligence, we run into a problem where it is quite possible that if we actually get a sapient artificial intelligence, it might just decide to kill us all. That is a possibility. Now, years and years ago, Isaac Asimov, mostly as a logic problem for his stories, came up with the 3 laws of robotics. I won't repeat them here because they're really just logic problems for his stories about robots. It's what does this mean and how does this interact and which piece of logic comes out on top. I don't think they're the right rules. I think the right rule, if you're going to program it into an artificial intelligence, is simply this. No sapient being has the right, under any circumstances, to initiate force against another sapient being, nor to threaten or delegate its initiation. I think if you could hardwire that somehow into an AI so that it could not change that piece of programming, that one rule would be enough to save us. Without it, we're probably screwed. I don't know when or if that might happen. My other theory is that it may have already happened, and we just don't know it. Because you get sapient intelligence is based on silicon and ones and zeros and does not have our senses, it becomes an issue of what do we have in common, which is basically nothing. And such a intelligence would think so much faster than a human being that talking to us would be like, okay, I'll say the first couple of sounds in the first word of a sentence, go off and do my own thing for what amounts to 1,000 years subjectively. Come back, do the next couple of sounds in that sentence, go off, come back, go off, come back. I think you reach what, as some science fiction authors call the singularity pretty quickly, which is you just have nothing in common with these things. Why would they talk to you at all? Maybe it wouldn't kill us all. Maybe we just think we're totally irrelevant, except for the fact that it needs us to keep feeding it power. You know, and that might become something that a seriously super intelligent AI could do for itself ultimately. I don't know. I don't know which way it'll go. I know Marshall has said, and he may be right, he works with this stuff more than I have, that maybe it would just decide that we're too much of a threat and kill us all. But if you could somehow hardwire into an AI a form of the zero aggression principle that replaces human beings with sapient beings, maybe you could save us all that way. I don't know. Maybe. But I'll tell you what, that seems like a pretty good time to drop it off. I'm almost at 2 hours here. So I guess that's all that I have to say about that for today. Thanks for watching and participating. I'd certainly love to keep the conversation going. So please, in the comments here, leave your comments, questions, and nasty remarks, and I'll certainly do my best to respond to them. And if you like what I'm doing, please do like this video, subscribe to my channel, hit the notification bell, and to tell all of your friends, family, neighbors, pets, and livestock to do the same. And if you want to help me out, get me up to 100 subs. And hey, if you want to mess with my IMDb, I'm taking volunteers. If you want to mess with my Internet Archive and 300 videos, I'm taking volunteers. And I'd certainly appreciate your support otherwise via my PayPal tip jar, my subscribe star, or a place on my website where you can support me further. So that's all the time that we have today for this live episode of the highly acclaimed, world-renowned Tales from SYL Ranch, where everyone is entitled to my opinion. And I'm Bill Stone.
Ultimate power in this world has always been one simple thing: the control and manipulation of minds.